This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday night. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes such as this one when there is breaking news. It is the second night of the NFL draft, and the New York Jets have used their second-round pick on Wisconsin center Joe Tippmann. Last night in the first round, it seemed like the Jets wanted to address the offensive line, especially the tackle position. However, all of the big tackles were off the board by the time the Jets picked at number 15 overall. In fact, the Pittsburgh Steelers traded in front of them. They traded up to 14, one pick in front of the Jets, to get Georgia tackle Broderick Jones, who was the last of the quote-unquote top-tier tackles. So on day two, the Jets address the offensive line, but they do it by drafting an interior lineman, and that is Joe Tippmann out of Wisconsin. Offensive line's an issue with the Jets. I think that there are plenty of question marks up front. I think that it's a unit you can talk yourself into when you've got Dwayne Brown, who's got a long track record in the NFL, when you've got Mekhi Becton, who was a first-round pick 3 years ago, Laken Tomlinson, Elijah Vera Tucker at guard, and then Connor McGovern, the incumbent center, returns on a cheap deal. But it's a unit that's got a lot of question marks. It's one of those things, if everything goes right, it can be good enough, but there are an awful lot of things that have to go right for this offensive line to pan out. And so the Jets, I think, in the short run, get some insurance by adding Joe Tippmann, because even though Tippmann does not really address the huge question spot, which is tackle, because at tackle you have the 38-year-old Brown and you have Becton, who has essentially missed 2 full seasons, Tippmann gives you some flexibility. Now, he did not play much guard at Wisconsin, but there's a thought he could slide there. Connor McGovern actually has experience playing guard in the NFL, not with the Jets, but with the Broncos. So if there's an injury anywhere on the line, Tippmann might be able to slide in. If McGovern gets injured, he's a natural fit for the center position. If one of the guards goes down, well, Tippmann might be able to fill in there, or he goes to center and McGovern goes to guard. If one of the tackles goes down, you can slide Tippmann in, and you can push Elijah Vera Tucker out to tackle. Vera Tucker played well, now limited action, but Vera Tucker played well both left tackle and right tackle last season because of injuries the Jets had there. So gives the Jets a little bit more insurance on the offensive line. I felt like there was a decent shot the Jets would take Tippmann in the second round because he's the type of prospect Joe Douglas likes. Joe Douglas values traits. We've talked about it over and over, and you everydayers who listen to this podcast on a daily basis, you've heard me talk about it over the last couple of weeks. It's not about production. It's not about refinement. Those things are nice, but I think Joe Douglas, who's off the Ozzie Newsome GM tree, loves the traits, because I think there's a thought process. You can't teach size. You can't teach athleticism. And Tippmann brings both to the table. Tippmann's essentially, it's kind of like he's a 6'6", he's a 6'6" center. There aren't many 6'6" centers in this league, and he moves really well. I mean, he can essentially run any kind of scheme you want, because he's a guy who, when he locks onto somebody, he can move them, and when he's on the move, he's very nimble. And big Jets fans who've been around the team for over 2 decades may remember there was a Hall of Fame center, who was with this team between 1998 and 2005, Kevin Mawae. And I'm not saying this because I think Joe Tippmann's going to the Hall of Fame. So let's dispense of that notion. I am not suggesting that Joe Tippmann is going to be as good as Kevin Mawae. But the reason I mentioned Mawae is something stylistic. Mawae was as good of a center on the move as existed in the NFL. And the Jets, during Mawae's tenure, were able to pull him and use him as part of the run game. And when you can pull your center, when your center can move, it opens up a lot on your playbook. There are lots of different things you can add. There are lots of different run concepts you can have that aren't in the normal team's playbook. And that's the type of thing Joe Tippmann had. So in the short run, you get a guy who at least helps you provide some degree of stability up front. He gives you some degree of depth, because behind these starters, there really was nothing. And it was a spot where I don't think you can ever go into the draft saying we need to draft X position or we need to draft X spot. But if the Jets did not leave this draft with an offensive lineman, it was going to be tough in the short run. And Tippmann brings a very intriguing tool set to the table. He's a guy who, this feels like the right spot for him, because he has a shot to be an excellent center in this league. You can never guarantee that anybody is going to succeed. You can never guarantee that anybody's going to fail. But there's a very high ceiling here because of his athletic traits, because of his size at 6'6". He's a big guy at center, but he also moves very well. And I think what you could say is that the last 2 nights, the Jets have added prospects with very high ceilings. And I know there was some degree of frustration about what they did last night. If you listened to Friday's regular show, I told you why you have to have an open mind with Will McDonald. Well, Joe Tippmann, I think, is going to be a much more popular pick, because he will help to stabilize this offensive line. And I think in the long run, the Jets hope that they've found their center of the future. And as we continue on this special Friday night edition of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll look a little bit down the road. Much of the focus for the Jets right now is about Aaron Rodgers and the near run, but the draft's all about adding long-term value. And we'll talk about what Joe Tippmann could become a few years from now as we continue this Friday evening edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Tonight's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. We spend a lot of time playing GM on this podcast. We talk about what the Jets should do or should not do. Well, Ultimate Football GM is a chance for you to test out your GM ability. It's a game, and you got to give it a try. It's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty, because when you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you are responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms, and navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all the ups and downs of a season. And all this is in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want to and when you want to. And Locked On Jets listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store. Again, that's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. And to download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com, Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Tonight's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're happy with the selection of Joe Tippmann, why don't you celebrate on this Friday night? Grab yourself a Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. These bars are absolutely amazing. Why is that? Because they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Not only that, they come in unbelievable flavors. They got churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies, and cream. But they're not just great tasting. They're also good for you. I don't know how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar, but they also maintain amazing macros. And what's better is they only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of proteins on most bars. And now you don't have to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Of course, you can still do that, but you can also go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. So head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puffs, or go to Sam's Club and grab a 13-bar box of hit flavors like brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. This is the Locked On Jets podcast as we talk about what the Jets did in the second round of the NFL draft. It's probably going to be their only selection of night 2. It's possible maybe they can make a trade and get another second or third round pick. Maybe they'll trade up. I don't think they should do that. I think if anything, they should have been looking to trade down from 43. But since they kept the pick, they grabbed Joe Tippmann. And I think you have to say that this addresses a short-term hole on this team. And maybe Tippmann's not an immediate starter, but I think you can go to bed tonight sleeping a little bit easier about this offensive line. Tackle's still an issue. Vera Tucker, he's probably going to be the first guy up at tackle. If there's an injury, he'll probably slide over from guard to tackle. But at least there's now a path forward with this offensive line in the short run. Now, in the long run, I think the goal is obviously for Joe Tippmann to become a starting center in this league. Connor McGovern is going to be back this year. He'll probably maintain the starting job, but he's on a very cheap salary. And I don't think it's inconceivable there's some sort of camp competition. And this is, in an ideal world, this is kind of what you do, is you draft somebody to replace a guy who's not a weakness, but a guy who probably is not with your team long term. So Tippmann's going to replace McGovern at some point. And I think what the plan is here is that McGovern's going to begin the season as the incumbent starter. He's going to begin training camp at least as the incumbent starter. But if Tippmann outplays him, well, then he can earn a spot in the lineup. I think that's the ideal way to deal with the draft. And then from there, whenever Tippmann takes the starting job over, the hope is that he'll never give it back. This is a guy who is intriguing because I think he fits almost any scheme you want. And there are really only 2 types of run schemes in the NFL. There's what's known as man blocking and zone blocking. And some of these, this is a bit of a misnomer because all teams at this point use a combination of man running plays and zone running plays. And essentially what you want in a man blocking play is you're assigned one guy. So your job is essentially destroy that guy. Your job is to drive him back 3-5 yards. And Tippmann's big enough to do that, and strong enough to do that. And he likes to lay a punch on somebody. He really likes to deliver a blow. He likes to move people. In the zone scheme, you're essentially assigned an area, and it tends to be a play that's run. It tends to be an area either to the left or the right of you. So you need to be nimble because you need to get to the area you're blocking. There's inside zone and there's outside zone, and whether it's inside zone or outside zone depends on where the ball carrier is initially trying to take the rushing attempt. Outside zone means that he's running outside. Inside zone means he's running, a little bit further inside between the tackles. For an outside zone play, you need guys who are even more athletic. Inside zone plays, you need guys who are athletic to get to the spot. Outside zone plays, because the ball is going further outside, your zone is typically going to be further away, so you need to be able to move. And Tippmann is as intriguing of a prospect in this year's draft class on the move as anybody. And I mentioned this in the first segment. I mean, he's going to add to the playbook. There are going to be plays you can run with Joe Tippmann if he's good, if he pans out, that you won't be able to run with a lot of other people because he essentially is mobile enough that you can design plays for him where he's blocking somebody who's far away from the snap. When he snaps the ball, he can cover so much ground that he can you can have him block on the outside, and that frees up other guys to go inside. It makes your run game more dangerous. It makes it more diverse. It makes the other team's defense a little bit more tentative because they know blocks could be coming from any angle. If the center can get all the way to the outside, then as a defender on the line, you have to really be aware of your surroundings, because even if the center's lining up across from you, the guy who's blocking you may be coming from another area. With a normal center, he's just going to be able to block you straight forward, and he's not really going to be able to go anywhere. But with Tippmann on the move, he will be able to help you out. And there are some other moderate effects that probably aren't that big of a deal, but you'll notice them when you see them. The ability to use him in the screen game, he'll add some help there. And you may get one or two plays a year where there's a big play downfield and he's able to hustle down there and throw a block because he's able to cover so much ground. But I think that this is clearly a pick where guy's got a high ceiling. Will he reach it? We don't know. And there are some technical things he's got to clean up a little bit. I don't think he's quite a finished product. I don't think he's totally refined. But I think a pick, if you're looking at skill set, if you're looking at what he brings to the table, if you're looking at college performance, a pick that's very easy to justify at 43. And a pick that helps the Jets in an immediate area of need. And I think, even though he's not a starter, depth on the offensive line was an area the Jets really were hoping to address in this year's draft. And at the very least, they were able to get a second-round pick there. Now, that's all for tonight's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. We have new episodes each day, Monday through Friday through the week, and then bonus episodes as needed. If you enjoy this show, please give it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. Give it a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Have a great Friday evening, unless the Jets move back into the second day by getting another second or third round pick. That's all for tonight, but we'll talk next time about what the Jets do in the rest of the NFL draft.